All right, so up next, I'd like to introduce Josh Chessman. Josh is a Senior Director Analyst at Gartner in the IT Operations Management Group, specializing in network application performance monitoring. Thank you, Josh. Just by way of background, Josh has spent more than 25 years working in IT, 13 years before Gartner at companies like Mazu Networks and Riverbed. So Josh, we asked you to join at this event. We devoured a lot of your research, identified many overlapping sort of themes with our ethos at Squared Up. Some of that research, how to optimize your investments in IT monitoring tools, innovation insight and observability, and how to build an ideal performance monitoring dashboard, something we're talking a lot about today. So I'll hand it over to you. Thank you again.
All right, thank you very much. It's good to talk to everybody, and I hope everybody is having an excellent show and a good day. So yeah, as said, we're going to talk a little bit about the sort of the future of IT and digital transformation and how that relates to monitoring and where things are going. So we can see here we've got this gentleman on the windsurfer, and let's be honest, the only thing that matters to him is holding on and not falling in. And in IT monitoring, the only thing that matters is business outcomes and customer experience. There's a lot going on for this guy here. He's got wind speed, he's got air temperature, wave height, all sorts of different things he has to focus on and keep track of. And that's sort of very consistent with what we see within IT and I&O. The monitoring of conditions should never be the end goal, however. It should, and that's what we where we see in where things are going. That monitoring within IT has always focused on measuring the performance and availability of applications, transactions, whether it's physical, virtual, systems, hardware, servers, network, storage, all of this stuff. That's the way monitoring has historically been done. But today, things have expanded. We have containers, we have Kubernetes, we have cloud metrics like those from AWS CloudWatch, Lambda, X-Ray, and much, much more. And this data isn't always coming to us the same way it used to. Sure, SNMP is still around, but we're seeing more and more use of things like APIs. And they're pulling this data from different places and putting it all in one place. And that's the reality, that monitoring is changing because the environment is changing. It's no longer just good enough to be able to say the network is up, the servers are up, they're not running at 100%, we have memory. It doesn't matter. It's business outcomes and customer experience that really are what matters. So, and that's what we're going to take a look at today. We'll take a look at a few different approaches and different ways we're getting there and where things are headed. So there are three key issues that we're going to discuss, where we're going to look at this in three parts. We're going to start with the external forces impacting IT monitoring. Then we're going to look at how IT monitoring is changing in response. And then finally, we're going to take a look at what should you be doing to actually adapt for this and support this and deal with this. So as we said, we're going to start with the external forces. Over the next 5 years, what are the external forces Gartner expects to impact IT monitoring going as we move forward? So the current state of IT operations monitoring, where are we today? Well, we've got a bunch of different teams within IT, and they're not always in sync with business goals. Sometimes they are, but often they're not. We've got a lot of overlapping tools and a lot of technical debt we have to deal with. We have limited ability to embrace automation. Some organizations are really good at automation, and some really aren't. We have visibility gaps, whether it's containers, cloud migration, hybrid environments, or anything like that. And we have things like AI and ML that are up and coming technologies, but really aren't being heavily used yet within many organizations. There's a lot more data to be processed. There are a lot more invested from product management and different lines of business and business owners. And there's been a recognition that monitoring has historically been very reactive, but that isn't a great way, I guess the best way to put it is to run the railroad, or that isn't a great way to get things going. You don't want to be reactive, you want to be proactive. So Gartner runs surveys from time to time, and we're looking at, in this case, what will be your priority for IT monitoring investment over the next 12 months. Now, this data isn't, it's been a weird last year and a quarter or so. So this isn't, things have changed a little bit, but we can look and see that traditional on-prem infrastructure only was showing 12%. Digital experience monitoring is 7%. All this data was taken before the COVID pandemic, or the survey. So these have changed fairly significantly. Unfortunately, we don't have updated, effective, or useful data right now, so I didn't have a new slide. But we've seen a big change in moving from traditional on-prem infrastructure only has moved down, digital experience monitoring has moved up, and hybrid infrastructure has only grown more. The reality is that customers expect more today, and that customer could be anything from an employee to someone buying something on your website. And it's not shocking if you think about where we are today. Streaming media, things like Netflix, it works. I get what I want right when I want it. I don't even have to, Netflix started mailing DVDs. I don't have to do that. I can just go online and boom, I have my video, whatever I want to watch. And it works really well. The result of this, though, is that customer experience has become much more important. If I can't get the video I want when I want it, that's a problem. I'm not going to renew with Netflix if they're not providing me what I want. I'm not going to renew with HBO Max, Disney Plus, whoever it is, if I'm not able to get what I want when I want it. Monitoring historically has not focused on my experience. It's focused on, is this up or down? Is it working? Is it not working? What is the performance like? What are the metrics? And metrics, while great, don't really matter from a business perspective. The business doesn't care what round trip time was or mean time to repair. The business cares about, in the example of Netflix, for example, how many streams per second are being delivered. That's a metric that's a business metric that's meaningful, but IT has to support that metric. IT can't say, well, we don't know how many streams per second are being delivered, but man, let me tell you, the round trip time on whatever streams are being delivered is great. Nobody cares. If the streams are being delivered, that's what people care about. And IT needs to be able to adjust to provide the information that the business needs. Monitoring maturity is a huge part of all of this. If you don't have a high level of monitoring maturity, then you have a problem. Everybody is different. This is not a case of, one is right or wrong, but, and unfortunately it went off the side of the slide, I apologize, but, a majority of organizations are doing diagnostics and service monitoring. Some are doing availability monitoring. Very few, you can see here, it's between 5 and 10% are doing business insights. And self-driving IT operations monitoring isn't really a thing at this point. It's starting to come along, but you can see basically nobody's doing that. But you can see from this that the majority of users are in that middle range of service monitoring and diagnostics. They've moved beyond availability, is it up or down, but they're not really providing that super detailed view of, are we meeting our business objectives? Most organizations are still at that service and diagnostics level. And there's nothing bad about that, but it isn't achieving that goal of being able to provide business insights. Now, monitoring is not easy. If it was easy, we would be doing it, what everybody wants to. But there are the 3 V's, as they say, or as we say, the three V's: volume, velocity, and variety of data. And it's overwhelming. We can collect more data faster today than we could yesterday or a year ago, and that's not going to slow down. It's only going to keep increasing. You could apply the adage of the speed of business has never been as fast as it is today, and it won't be this slow again, to data. The volume, velocity, and variety of data available has never been as broad as it is today, and will never be as narrow as it is today again. And that's a huge challenge, because just having lots and lots of data doesn't tell me what the problem is, doesn't help me identify the problem. All it does is give me lots and lots of data. I still need to analyze it. And honestly, when you're analyzing data, more data isn't always good, especially if you're trying to analyze it manually. We can see here some of the examples of data: infrastructure data, application data, user and customer sentiment data, all sorts of different data. And that's all being generated either automatically or in some way automatically. And we need to figure out, what do we do with all of this data moving forward? The good news is, and everybody to a large degree knows it, there is gold in that monitoring data. We know it's in there. The information we need is there. It does, however, start to become kind of like that needle in a haystack. I may have petabytes of data, but I only need that one piece of data that's going to actually tell me what the problem is, why users can't buy things, what is the inventory level in my warehouse, what was in the shopping basket, why couldn't I check out when I was trying to buy something. All of that data is there, but because we've got so much data, it's hard to find it. We can find things like abandonment. Why are people not buying things? Where are they buying from? Why are they not staying? Why are they churning? Why are we churning customers? Things like that. All that data is available. It's just a matter of being able to extricate the actual data in a useful way and present it in a useful way that really is key. It's important to have transparency across hybrid and cloud, multi-cloud environments, but it's very complex. One of the more common questions I get is, we're a hybrid environment, we're multi-cloud, and we need visibility into that. And it's a huge problem. It's not trivial. Again, just like many other things, if it was trivial, we wouldn't have to be talking about this. We would just be doing it. But every time we add more, whether it's another cloud environment, moving from on-prem to partial cloud, setting up another data center, going to containers and orchestration, things like Docker and Kubernetes, leveraging cloud native APIs, it adds some complexity to the environment. And how do we deal with that? How do we figure out what's going on? And it's something everybody struggles with. There are tools out there that will provide data, and some of them work in multi-cloud environments, some of them work in hybrid environments, but not all do. And it's especially problem if you have existing legacy tools where you didn't have something. For example, you may not have had cloud 2 years ago or a year ago, or honestly 6 months ago, or last week. And how do you deal with that? What do you do to pivot from whatever I'm using today that may not support multi-cloud? And of course, we get into that situation of, how do we get to the to that impossible dream, the single pane of glass? I hear that a lot. We want a single pane of glass to present this information. And I'll get into that in a slide further down, but what we often see when people pursue a single pane of glass is a single glass of pain. It's very difficult to do that well. The good news is that it's not necessary to have a single pane of glass. But don't worry, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have visibility into what's happening, and we'll discuss that in a few slides down. So as we move faster, as we become more dependent on things like business outcomes, and the IT and I&O are starting to need to support business more, it becomes an issue of speed. How fast can you perform? If you're looking periodically, sampling as it is called, then you may miss something. Yeah, sampling can be very good, but you're not necessarily getting everything you want. It's a big issue that sampling can work very well, but you are missing data. And if you're missing data, how do you know what the problem is? Will you notice if there's a problem? It's a big issue of, how do we get the right amount of information where we need it, when we need it, at a speed we need it. If I'm a website and I'm selling widgets and my website goes down, every second that website is down, I'm not selling a widget. Even if I'm not selling widgets, if I'm dependent on my website to draw customers into my company for whatever reason, if I'm Twitter, I'm not selling widgets, but Twitter goes down, that's money that Twitter is losing. There's a real problem around performance and speed, and how fast can we fix problems? How fast can we get things better? And how agile can we be? And can we operate at the speed of business? And that requires a very fine-grained level of monitoring. You can't just look at, is this server up or down? I need to have a much more detailed view of what's happening with my server. Why is it performing the way it is? How is it performing? Here's an example from the need for advanced intelligence. Microsoft missed renewing a certificate, which resulted in Teams being down for 2 hours, and this was last year. They just had a problem today where a upgrade they made caused a major issue for first Europe and Asia, and eventually the rest of the world, until they were able to figure out what had happened. But a certificate expired and nobody noticed, and as a result, Microsoft Teams was down in many parts of the world for hours. And if you're using Microsoft Teams for your communications, whether it's just internal or communicating with customers, that is a major issue. You can't have 2 hours of outage if that means you're not able to take orders or talk to customers. The first thing we do when something fails is we ask, did it work yesterday? Yeah, worked yesterday. I was on Teams many times yesterday. So if it did work yesterday, what changed? Well, many things change. I might have had a new update. I might have applied a new network configuration. I might have done a whole lot of different things. If you're a SaaS provider, it can be a little bit more complicated because I don't have as an end user visibility into SaaS, but I don't necessarily not need to know what's going on. And SaaS providers are in many ways in worse situation where they need to be able to send and communicate with their customers and partners. Probably the worst thing that you can do as a SaaS provider is have your customers find out about the problem from Twitter. Nobody wants that to be the case of, hey, you know what? According to Twitter, Microsoft Teams is having an outage. That's not a great way to do things. So proactive monitoring. Most organizations aren't doing it. Most organizations are reactive. Most organizations are looking at metrics and saying, okay, what's going on? Are we having a good experience or a bad experience? What are my metrics telling me about the experience? Black Friday in the United States is a good example. The day after American or U.S. Thanksgiving, when people are supposed to go out and shop and shop and shop and shop, and that, it's great. We should do that. It's great for the economy. I don't know if it's great for everything, but it's great for the economy. Well, what happens if you're not able to predict when you're going to have an outage? Costco was down for 16 and a half hours, lost almost $11 million because their internal servers were unable to handle the high load that was being generated from all of these sites. And there are numerous examples of this. It's happened to Apple. Apple had a problem when the Apple Watch came out, and the day after Christmas, everybody went to, or the day Christmas Day, everybody went to activate their Apple Watch, and guess what? It didn't work because so many people were trying to activate the Apple Watch. It's not an uncommon problem. We mentioned the MS Teams issue. Facebook, Instagram, and Facebook Messenger were down for 2.5 hours a ways back because they have a shared infrastructure. They were actually able to detect the problem, but the auto remediation they were using didn't work, and they had an issue. And this is part of the challenge of going from being reactive to proactive. You want to be able to know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, before it happens. Here we can see another one of the surveys, and this is looking at the percentage of tools that organizations have. Now, again, this is taken from a Gartner conference, so it is 211 results, and I have talked to many, many clients who have far more than 30 tools. I'm talking hundreds of tools, 100, 200, even 300 different tools for monitoring. And while nothing is nothing inherently bad about that. I mean, there are definitely situations where you need point solutions to address specific things. As a friend of mine would joke, I need this tool to demagnetize my rain gutters, which is great because rain gutters are generally made out of aluminum, not so magnetic. But the reality is that you need to have, there are point solutions you're going to need, but you need to have a way to view all of that data and put it all in context and relate it all to the business objectives that you're trying to achieve. And how is it helping to achieve it? Because let's be honest, if IT and I&O isn't helping achieve business objectives, then they're effectively a hindrance or standing in the way. You need to be able to, be part of the team, be a team player, so to speak, and be achieving those objectives, not standing in the way of the people trying to do it. All right. So that's sort of where we are, where things have been. Now, let's take a look at a response to that of how will monitoring change because of what we've just talked about. What's going to be different, the same, things along those lines. So, here's these, here's a similar slide to what we started with. The future state of IT operations monitoring, it's going to be unified, it's going to be holistic, agile, intelligent, but most importantly, it's going to be business focused. All the rest of that is very important. Unified monitoring is a very good thing if you can get it. Being agile, able to pivot quickly, resolve things fast, fail fast, as they say, very important. You got to be intelligent, AI, ML, things like that, holistic, view the whole thing. But the most important part is it has to be business focused. It has to be focused on how is my monitoring helping my organization achieve its business goals. Because the reality is business goals are the main objective. So here we have sort of a what we would call a strategic planning assumption that by 2025, 50% of new cloud native application monitoring will use open source instrumentation instead of vendor specific agents for improved interoperability, up from about 5% in 2019. It's a little bit higher now, but not significantly. We'll see if the 2025 number is right. Could be a little earlier, could be a little later, but we're seeing a major shift in organizations away from vendor-specific proprietary agents, and that can be anything from something you see with an APM vendor, somebody like, say, a Dynatrace, to anything else where you're leveraging a proprietary agent to gather data. And we're going to see a movement away from that more towards these open source agents because it provides a lot more flexibility. And it means that my applications can be instrumented from the inside out effectively. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So let's talk about observability a little bit. Observability is a relatively new thing. It's become a bit of a buzzword. You've got to be a little careful. You hear a lot about observability. I've started hearing network observability. Well, networks have always been observable. I mean, that's silly. You can say network observability, but the reality is that it doesn't mean anything really. Whereas observability in the way it's originally intended and defined is much more focused on the application. And in a sort of very basic way of putting it, observability is the movement or the change from having to instrument an application to the application being made observable. Now, I will admit it took me a little while to sort of get the differences there, and I'll do my best to explain it. But as best I can for today's definition, these things do tend to change fairly rapidly over time. But the process of observability, and this ties in with that those open source data agent type things that we were talking about, is that instead of having to go out and say, I'm going to deploy a proprietary agent on my application, on my server, whatever it is, I'm going to build an open source agent into my application, and that's going to provide data to everybody, not just the vendor I'm using. So that's things like OpenTelemetry, or the W3C trace context, which has been adopted by OpenTelemetry. And there are a few other open vendors out there who are doing similar kinds of things, although OpenTelemetry does seem to be doing quite well. And like I said on one of the previous slides, we're not seeing this everywhere yet, but we are seeing a lot of change with more and more people moving towards this OpenTelemetry. So, in the beginning, it is the beginning of the end for agents. Not that agents are ever going to fully go away, most likely. I mean, maybe someday, but not in the discernible future. But we are going to see this movement to these sort of open source agents. So essentially, instead of an agent asking, is everything okay? Hey, application, are you still running? Hey, server, what's going on? What's your CPU? The apps and infrastructure are going to more self-report. So here's what's going on. Here's what my CPU, here's what my memory, here's what's happening within this application. Here's how my containers are doing. Here's how my orchestration is doing, versus having to be asked, how are you doing? So, what are the benefits here? Well, there are a lot of benefits. cost can be one of them, although it depends on how you're doing it. But a standardization on instrumentation is going to make it easier to share instrumentation data across vendors. There may be some initial complexity as you're rolling this out and making it work, but the long-term benefits are going to vastly outweigh any short-term benefits, especially as we start seeing more and more of this built in automatically, whether it's through the public cloud providers or within the containers themselves or anything like that. What's it's going to mean, though, is that things like the agent technology from proprietary vendors is not going to be a main differentiator or a differentiator at all. It's going to be a sort of table stakes. We're going to be able to collect the same data from everywhere, and it's not going to matter whether I'm using agent A, agent B, or agent C. That's a big change. That's a big change from where we've been. We're also starting to see movement to open source frameworks, things like Open Tracing or Jaeger or Open Census, and there's a whole bunch of other ones. I mentioned W3C Trace Context as well. There's a lot of changes happening that is going to make a big difference around how we're collecting data and what we're doing with that data, how we're analyzing it, what tools we need to analyze it in, and lock in and things like that. It's going to be a lot easier if we need to make a change. We have things like Prometheus. It's a data format. It's widely adopted in the monitoring ecosystem. It's become to a large degree a de facto standard. And it's now has a independent effort called Open Metrics, which is an effort to create an open standard for transmitting metrics at scale, no longer dependent on proprietary data or anything like that. So the objective is to identify the unknown unknowns. We can all remember, but there have been a number of unfortunate uses of unknown unknowns. But the reality is that's one of the keys with things like observability. Monitoring can tell you what's wrong with what you know about, and it might be able to tell you about some of the unknown unknowns. But being able to figure out what the problem is when we don't know what the problem is, or that there's even a problem, is key. So I said I'd come back to single pane of glass, and I am, as I said. So the single pane of glass is, to a large degree, a myth. Not that we shouldn't have dashboards, not that we shouldn't have tools to present these dashboards. I'm sure that Jason is sitting there going, what is he saying? The myth of the single pane of glass, that's terrible. We're a dashboarding company. But that's the point, actually, is that they're a dashboarding company. And that is what you want. Single pane of glass, when I talk with clients about it and when I hear about it, is I want a single dashboard that everybody can use that shows me everything. And that isn't realistic, because the network engineer, the application engineer, the developer, the infrastructure engineer, the line of business owner, the product manager, the CTO, the CEO, all have different needs. And trying to create a single dashboard that works for everybody is, honestly, to put it mildly, slightly insane. You're not going to have that. Or if you do, the dashboard is going to be so massive that literally no one's ever going to be able to find what they want on it. Instead, you need to determine the metrics each person or persona needs to do their job and do it right. And then you create a dashboard for that persona. And this ends up being a hierarchy of dashboards. So you start at the top, and maybe you have one dashboard where everybody starts, which presents sort of general information. Everything is good or everything is bad, or what's good and what's bad. So whether I'm a CTO, I'm a product manager, a network engineer, a developer, I can go in and say, okay, everything is good or bad. And then I can drill into further down into dashboards showing me here's what's good or here's what's bad about these specific things. I'm the network engineer. I need network data. I'm a developer and I work on these modules. I don't care about the other modules. I need to know about these specific modules. I'm infrastructure. I need to know about the performance of the server. Maybe the developer does as well, because if the problem is performance on the hardware performance or virtual hardware performance related, I need to know that, but I don't necessarily need to know everything that the infrastructure engineer needs to know. And that's one of the things that I see a lot of organizations struggle with, is how do we come up with a dashboard that shows what we want? I have my top level dashboard, then I have a triage dashboard. So there's a problem, I can come in and look at it. Maybe I have a dependency mapping dashboard that's going to show me how all of the different parts of my service are working together. And then I have my drill downs, my application drill down, my infrastructure drill down, my network drill down. We saw some really fun examples of how people put squared up dashboards together. But those aren't necessarily single panes of glass. They're dashboards that people put together to meet their needs or their department or group's needs. And that's why we say the single pane of glass results in a single glass of pain. It's not, the objective isn't to have a single pane of glass. The objective is to have a single tool that you can leverage to provide the visibility and the information that everybody needs. And when you have that, now people can be more effective because they're able to see what they need. So tools expand to provide what the business values. And that, what that means is that we have lots of different things that people need. We've got two very different worlds, really, with different languages. We've got the business side and we have the IT side. And they speak different languages, and you can lose a lot in translation when you're trying to get between these two. Business side talks about abandonments, conversions, churn, things like that. IT talks about latency, MTTR, resource utilization, things like that. And maybe you understand it and maybe you don't. So how do we get to that common understanding? How do we get to a point where everybody understands what everybody else is talking about, and we can be that much more effective at IT supporting the business and the business getting what they need from IT? And that's where monitoring tools that perform digital experience monitoring really come into play. They're able to get a view for business metrics and processes and bridge that gulf between IT and the business. The tools, they capture they capture the business context of IT, and the relation between IT and business performance can be shown. And I have some more detailed examples coming up. But again, it's going to show me what's happening. And ideally, that's going to be on role-specific self-service dashboards. I'm going to be able to say, I'm the developer, I can go in and see what I need. I'm the CEO, I can go in and see what I need. And the trend is definitely towards convergence of tools. APM with ITIM and business process monitoring, ITIM solutions that are adding APM functionality, network tools that are adding infrastructure functionality. I wouldn't not say that everybody's doing a great job of it, but we're seeing a lot of movement in that direction, and things are definitely getting better over time. So I promised we'd have some, sort of better examples. And, this is it's a funnel visualization of the steps in a sample customer journey. Now, obviously, as I said, it's a sample customer journey. This isn't showing a real world example of what's happening for a specific website or anything like that, at least not that I'm aware of. But if you look at it from the business perspective, you can see that I have product selection, login and registration, billing and shipping info, payment, confirmation, and then a final conversion rate. And these are all steps along the funnel as someone's trying to buy whatever it is they're trying to buy from our website. And then we have also the pages monitored: selection, login, bill, payment, confirm, things like that. And it's providing a real-time insight into the business process and customer journeys. And you start by tracking business metrics as a flow of interactions that provide a model of the business process or the customer journey. It's this entire process. It's not just the login page is doing this, or we're only having a 40% of people filling out our billing and their billing and shipping information. It's this entire process. And you need to move beyond monitoring just singular events. So historically, maybe you would have had a tool that monitored billing, or is someone filling in the bill information? Is that working or not? Today, you need to monitor that, but you need to monitor it within context. If 40% of people are filling in billing and shipping information, but only 42% are making a product selection, okay, that's, perfectly legitimate. That's, you're still losing a little bit, but you're not losing that much. In this case, we're seeing 100% make product selection, 75% are proceeding to login and registration, but only 40% are filling in their billing and shipping info. That is a huge drop in what's going on. Now we have these greens, so maybe that's within the realm of what we're expecting, but we only have 30% making payment and 25% confirming. Well, what's happening to all those other people who are not buying? Why aren't they buying? And that's where all this is headed, is that I&O and IT need to be monitoring based on Why is payment only 30% of people actually proceeding with payment? What's going on? Is it a problem with the infrastructure, with the application, on-prem, cloud? Why are we having these issues? But that's where things are headed. You need to be business oriented, not the payment page isn't working, but we're not having people complete the payment page. Why? So DEM has evolved from availability and performance, and we've seen a big increase in interest in DEM over the last year, especially, mainly related to COVID and the remote work. But things are changing, and we start with the what. So DEM began with availability monitoring via synthetic transactions, and it was simply answering the question: is this thing up or down? Maybe, maybe not. We added performance monitoring tools with things like real user monitoring, and we got to a case of, is it fast? And then we got to things around security as part of DEM, and we're asking, is it safe? And that relates to what we're seeing here similarly, where we start with the what. What is the, that's where we started of, is it secure? What's the quality, availability, performance? Then we moved on to the who. We're looking at digital agents, we're looking at clients, employees, but really we want to move to the why. What are the business outcomes? Are we achieving them? Are we, what's going on with those? So, so that's where we're seeing DEM. It's evolving from some technology that was very focused on, starting with, is it up or down, to how are we achieving our business outcomes? What are we doing? Are we doing a good job, a bad job? Why are we or aren't we achieving our outcomes? There we go. So now let's take a quick look at AI, or AI Ops. And AI Ops is essentially, it's the usage of machine learning algorithms to observe and make better sense of monitoring data. And it does this using things like pattern recognition, also known as clustering or bucketing, detection of anomalies in time series, prediction or extrapolation, classification of behavior, and causality, root cause analysis. Now, keep in mind, AI Ops is not a panacea today. It is not going to solve all your problems and make everything perfect, but it is very important. I've mentioned a couple of times now that we're generating more and more data faster from more and more different sources, and no person can look at this. You look at the amount of data generated from analysis and monitoring tools at even mid-sized organizations, and you could be looking at terabytes, if not petabytes of data a day, and no person can look at this. AI Ops can look at that, correlate it, make sense of it, and give you useful, actionable information very quickly. Now, like I said, it's not a panacea. AI Ops is still in its infancy. There are a number of vendors out there. It's coming along, but it's getting better, and it's something that everybody is going to be using at some point, even if they're not using it today. But really what it does is it lets you go from being reactive to proactive. You can say, I'm tired of looking at data and saying, oh, look, round trip time is up, or this application crashed, I need to fix it, to looking at data and saying, hey, you know what? Let's look at what my garbage collection rate is, what my memory usage and CPU utilization is, and analyze that, look at it in context and say, hey, you know what? Last time we saw garbage collection increasing at this rate, memory usage increasing at this rate, and CPU increasing at this rate, we had an outage in 2 weeks, and here's the solution to it. And that's where AI Ops is headed. We're not there yet, don't get me wrong, but we're definitely headed in that way. AI Ops can be used to recognize those known problems and recommend solutions. So, in my example, this service was the problem, we had to restart it, and maybe it's non-intrusive. That service is something that runs on the back end that if it's down for 5 minutes, nobody will notice because it doesn't actually do anything that's relevant to that. It's a batch transfer thing. Okay, let's just restart that whenever. Or look at this and say, hey, you know what? This is going to be a problem. We need to schedule a change window to reschedule this. That's where we are today very much with AI Ops. But over time, we're going to see the usage of a closed loop approach where we can do things like vote for a solution to better inform and teach the algorithm. We're going to see things improve where AI Ops is going to be able to do real root cause analysis and say, I've never seen this problem before, but based on what I'm seeing, it looks like this is the challenge, and let's resolve it. So AIOps is going to be a major change. It's going to let us go from being reactive to proactive to the proverbial self-driving network. So identify a potential problem or a future or existing problem, come up with the root cause, solve it, or identify the root cause, and then solve whatever the problem is, whether restarting a process, restarting a system, or anything along those lines. So this builds out from AI Ops, and one of the keys with AI Ops is that you need to have both good CMDB, because if you don't know everything that's in your environment, you have a problem, and you need to have it integrated with your ITSM. If you integrate your AI Ops and your ITSM and everything together, and it's a lot of what we've been talking about, it lets you get a much better view of what's happening. Your ITSM, monitoring should send updated topology and other information to your ITSM so it can improve its service map and also help open up tickets and resolve tickets and route tickets to the appropriate person. And monitoring should receive change events. So if we made a change, if we applied used automation to apply a network switch update or anything like that, that all needs to be reflected back to the monitoring tools. And that's really where one of the places CMDB comes in, because with your CMDB, you can leverage it to see what's going on, where is it going on, and what is being impacted by it. Without that very detailed view, you really will struggle around things like root cause analysis, especially when it grows out into other areas. And I mentioned previously that the first question you ask when something doesn't work that used to work is, what changed? Well, that's what all of this comes down to. With my CMDB and my ITSM and AI Ops and machine learning, is being able to, and monitoring, going in and looking and saying, okay, what changed over the last day, week, month, year, whatever it is. So just focusing on AI Ops a little more, we break AI Ops into two different categories, and we're going to focus on domain agnostic AI Ops. Domain agnostic AI Ops is the concept of an AI Ops tool that is able to take data in from multiple different tools, whether it's DEM, NPMD, APM, ITIM, or anything else, and analyze that within context. It lets you get a broader view of what's happening with your network or your environment or your server or your application or your infrastructure, because instead of just saying, well, I'm a network tool and so everything must be a network problem, it looks at it and says, okay, well, I'm seeing a problem and it could be a network problem, but it looks like it's more likely to be an infrastructure problem. This switch has been running at 100% CPU and 100% memory. So while, yes, we're seeing a lot of retransmits on the network, we should check this switch first and make sure that that's the problem. And keep in mind, as I said a couple of times, we're still in the early days. Nobody's necessarily going to take this, deploy it, and have a full self-driving network tomorrow. Nothing else, it takes a while to get it up and running and everything like that. But we're headed in that direction, and the future of I&O and IT monitoring is AI Ops in pretty much any scenario. Might not be for 5 years, but we're going to get there, and and everybody is heading in that direction. We do see a number of domain agnostic vendors out there who are focusing on this, but we also see a number of domain centric vendors. You talk to any vendor selling you pretty much any kind of monitoring tool today, whether it's application, network, or infrastructure, or DEM, and they have some kind of analytics that they're providing. All right, moving on, because I'm falling behind. So we need to, the next step is automation. I've mentioned it a little bit with the, in relations to AI Ops, but automation is going to increase IT's agility and functionality, because you're going to be able to automate and make changes faster and more efficiently and more reliably. If you have to go out and make one change to one router, no big deal. Pretty much anybody can do that. It's pretty easy. If you need to go out and make 50 changes to 100 or 1,000 routers, sure, you can do that manually, and lots of people do, but the chances for a mistake or a typo or anything like that increase pretty much exponentially, and that's a problem. And automation is going to resolve a lot of that. It's going to let you make changes that might not have been able to be made without a change window. You'll be able to make those because they can happen faster and more reliably. You can simulate changes on a model of your network and see, okay, if I make these 10 changes to these 5 routers, what is the impact going to be? How is it going to impact my application? Things like that. So we're going to see a lot of changes. Automation is going to continue to increase, And organizations will move in that direction because it provides so many benefits. We're also starting to see much more of a ITOps and SecOps integration, and there's a lot of good reason for this. Partially, there's a lot of overlap between the data that's being collected. As a result, we need to be able to leverage all that data for both teams. And if we can leverage a single tool, that's better. There are still challenges, it's not perfect, but there is a lot of tools today that span both of network and in security monitoring, and that should be leveraged. But also, historically, SecOps and NetOps and DevOps have sort of been, I guess, the enemy to each other. I've seen each other as the enemy. It's well, the security team, they want to have a highly secure network, and the performance, yeah, it's important, but not as important. The network team, well, we want to have our network really, really fast and efficient and reliable, but the security, we're willing to sacrifice some of that. And developers, they just want their application to work. They don't really care what happens with the rest of it. They don't care about the network. And that's not a great way to run the railroad. You really need your teams working together, all towards the same goal of a fast, reliable, effective, and efficient network and application working together. So monitoring across DevOps and ITOps. It's a pretty complex chart we show here, and we have to work together though. IT operation monitoring and DevOps monitoring has to happen together, and it has to happen much earlier in the life cycle of the application than it has historically. Historically, IT operations monitoring has sort of been the second thought or the afterthought of what's going on. Okay, we're gonna, we'll build our application, we'll test it, and then we'll add our monitoring. And that's great, but it's much more efficient and effective if you can introduce that monitoring at an earlier state and know what's going on. So when I push out a new release, if I'm monitoring that from the beginning, I know that when I put out the next release, version 3.1 or whatever it was, it's 10% slower on key transactions than version 3 was. And knowing that lets me provide a solution potentially or roll back much more efficiently and effectively. But I need that closer integration between my DevOps and my ITOps teams and start earlier to be able to provide meet my business objectives. So there are alternatives. I'll touch on this very briefly. Do-it-yourself monitoring. There are a number of different open source and corporate-backed products out there that allow you to do open source monitoring effectively. You can, get very good, very productive solutions out there for very little money. The challenge, of course, with anything from open source is there's limited support, potentially. I'm Josh, I build this out, it's great, it does a great job, but I don't document things really well. Okay, so what if I leave the company? What if I get hit by a bus? All sorts of things can happen. How do you go on from there? And, so it's a huge challenge. And I'm not saying that because I think open source is bad. I think open source is great. I love it. I use it all the time. But you need to keep it in perspective and make sure that you have the appropriate structures in place around you to ensure that you're able to support that going forward. You don't want to end up in a position of saying, hey, it's great, we saved $1 million by going with Grafana and OpenTelemetry and Prometheus and all these other things, only to find out in 6 months that you're going to spend $2 million because the person who put it all together left and didn't document it, and now you have a problem. So what should enterprises do to prepare for the new IT monitoring environment? Last section. So first thing you need to do is reorient your perspective. You need to monitor from the top down. You need to not monitor from the perspective of how are my systems doing, but you need to monitor from the perspective of what are my business processes and how are we supporting and achieving those processes and goals? Are we actually able to do what we want to do? We should make sure that our business is accomplishing its goals, and that's what we should be doing for monitoring. So, and it's a significant change. You need to move from the way we have historically monitored of collecting metrics and trying to figure out if things are good or bad to looking at what is the business objective and what are the business processes for achieving those objectives, and then monitor based on that. You need to push your boundaries. You need to become more agile. You need to figure out what's going on. It's important to know that if a performance problem occurred in the new release that was deployed 10 minutes ago, and that not only is latency up 10%, but sales order volume is down by 10%. And then be able to automatically back out that misbehaving release or portion of the release so that you can get that that performance back up. because, I mean, maybe you don't need to, maybe you don't want to, but most likely you do, but it's all within context. Just looking and saying, well, latency is up 10% without knowing what the sales order volume is doing isn't very helpful, because you could look at that from an IT perspective and say, 10%, that's not bad. But a 10% drop in sales, that is a potentially significant problem. And you need to evolve your monitoring stages. So stage 1, availability monitoring; stage 2, service monitoring; stage 3, diagnostics; stage 4, business insights; and stage 5, self-driving ITOM. Most organizations are at this 2 or 3, service monitoring and diagnostics. But you need to move to business insights, customer journeys, business processes. Are we helping the business achieve the business goals? As I said, this is where the majority are. 41 and 36% are at these levels 2 and 3. But the objective, obviously, is to get to stage 5, with stage 4 being the next step. Stage 5 we're not really at yet from a realistic perspective. And then strategic roadmap. 2021, start looking at AI ops, start leveraging it. Get your teams coordinating and collaborating more. Make things more efficient and effective. 2022, broaden your IT operations skill set. Move out from just infrastructure, network, etc., and move to how are we achieving our business goals? It's a different skill set. Shift from a single stack specialist to a generalist. You don't need someone who is a CCIE 17 times over necessarily when you're using a lot of automation, but that you need people who know networking. You can't have someone who doesn't know networking supporting your network, but they might also know application and infrastructure so that they can better support and deal with things. Support your digital project, business product monitoring. And in 2023, move more towards how are we helping the business achieve the goals, and how are we helping specifically meet digital businesses. And then maybe 2024, things like that, AI-driven, closed-loop automation, full-blown everything automation, and we're all sitting on the beach relaxing, and life is great. So, to sort of wrap it all up, the monitoring is the only thing that the only thing that matters is business outcomes and customer experience. And you need to move from reactive monitoring to proactive monitoring, become the creator, curator, analyst, utilizer, and distributor of business insights and IT operations wisdom. That's where IT needs to get to. If you can't get there, organizations will continue to struggle because they're not able to help meet those business outcomes and customer experiences. I want to thank you very much. I apologize for running a few minutes over, and I hope that this has been interesting to everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh, for diving into all that for us. So much of what you shared, it does resonate with us and kind of what we're hearing from our customers too. Like that last bit of sitting on the beach and relaxing. Maybe we'll get a chance to do that before 2024. But no, a lot of that stuff like drowning in data, but starving for insights. You talked about like volume, velocity, variety. This challenge, this lack of transparency between kind of on-prem and cloud, that's become such a common theme as well. And then this goal of a single pane of glass, like it's misleading. Maybe it's even a little bit insane, but ultimately, is it possible to have one place to go that kind of connects the dots to all these things that matters? And that varies depending on what your role is, right? And ultimately, it's remembering that has to do with the context of the business service that we care about. So thank you again. If you're able to stick around for 10 minutes or so, maybe you could head over to the booth in case anybody has any questions to pick your brain. But again, it was really great to have you over here.
Thank you.